that all said, we do need to talk about the next bit on this roller coaster ride that is life. We got some fan art to get into, but now we have to revisit the TikTok conversation specifically. Now, I'm not going to go back on any of the things I said about TikTok being basically brain rotting and also functionally being filled with a ton of misinformation as much as it is filled with good information that has barely any filter. I'm not going to rescind any of those statements, because they're all fucking true. But there is more to that conversation now that we have to talk about that I think you guys probably are not gonna like that much. First, though, let's get into the fan art section. This one is from Dog5. This took so long to draw that I can't remember what the caption was going to be. I think it was something about being able to see the dress more clearly without the horse being in the way, and possibly a note about still not knowing why you have a horse. This weird, like, Princess Suris has a horse thing is canon. Okay, I just accept that it's real. As always, thank you for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. That said, so, Romney has made some statements about some of the actual reasons why the TikTok ban is even being talked about in the first place. Remember how I said that one of the reasons why the United States takes the stance with Israel that they do is because of money? It's largely because the United States is a trade partner with Israel. So the amount of lives that are falling at our feet are literally falling at our feet because of dollary dues. And that's kind of screwed up. But if you just read the title of this, that's enough to get your blood boiling. Romney admits that the push to ban TikTok in the United States is aimed at censoring news out of Gaza. A conversation between the Secretary of State Attorney Blinken and the Republican senator offered an incredible historical document showing how the U.S. views its role in the Middle East. Oh boy. A discussion between U.S. Secretary Attorney Blinken and Senator Mitt Romney over the weekend included what one critic called an incredible mask-off moment, with the two officials speaking openly about the U.S. government's long-term attempts to provide public relations work for Israel in defense of its policies in the occupied Palestinian territories, which would be the West Bank and Gaza. And its push to ban TikTok in order to shut down America's access to unfiltered news about Israel's assault on Gaza. So this is the other half of that TikTok conversation we had in that previous video, basically. Hasn't it always been that way in the crusade against TikTok? What do you... has it always been because of the Israel thing? No, because I think the TikTok banning conversation started well before October 7th, but it's certainly become a reason to do it now. So, while the United States might give token support to the Gaza Strip, it might give token support to the West Bank, ultimately, Israel's apartheid bullshit in the Middle East is supported by the United States government. Because again, they are a trade partner with the United States. And if there's one thing that a hyper-capitalist nation will always do, it is try to protect its bottom dollar. Which is a bit screwy. At the Sedona Forum in Sedona, Arizona on Friday, the Utah Republican asked Blinken at the McCain Institute event's keynote conversation why Israel's public relations have been so awful as it's bombarded Gaza since October in retaliation for a Hamas-led attack, killing 34,735 Palestinians, the majority women and children, and pushing parts of the enclave to a famine that is expected to spread due to Israel's blockade. Said the world is screaming about Israel. Why aren't they screaming about Hamas? Asked Romney. Accept a ceasefire, bring home the hostages. Instead, it's the other way around. I mean, typically the Israelis are good at PR. What happened here? How have they and we been so effective at communicating the realities there? Well, so of course Republican Mitt Romney is going to say that what he thinks the realities are, but the reality is, Hamas or no, the fact that the majority of Palestinian casualties have been civilian speaks volumes about what Israel is doing in the Middle East. yes, Hamas is a organization that is awful, and the way they were birthed was in a way that would literally call for the wiping out of Israel as we know it. But at that same time, looking at how things are right now, Hamas's existence is what you would call inevitable. Would you call it justified? No, we already had that argument. But it is what you would call inevitable. A terrorist organization taking power in an apartheid state that is being disenfranchised by the people who are in control of their lives? Yeah, that's about what you would expect to happen. It is an understandable scenario that Hamas exists in the way that they do. It doesn't justify any of their actions, but it does make sense that they would exist in an environment where the people who are under them, who originally voted them in decades ago, are starving. Accepting a ceasefire, which I believe a ceasefire already happened once earlier in this war, accepting a ceasefire is to go back to the status quo functionally. The status quo was fucked. The status quo was completely just not favorable to the Palestinian people to begin with. So accepting a ceasefire in the current conditions and going back to the status quo as things were, as they have been for the last 80 years, I'm sorry, that's not good for the Palestinians in that region. There is no way, shape, or form where that is good for the people of Palestine. So the pressure of this kind of magnitude will create hatred that leads to groups like Hamas. Said it's worth northern Gaza is just colonized under a ceasefire. So the status quo is now worse, but that's an argument for another time. Well, yeah, the status quo would be worse because there's 35,000 bodies. The status quo would be worse because there's fewer hospitals in the Gaza Strip. Several of Palestine's hospitals and also their learning institutes have been destroyed. It is impossible to go back to the original status quo that was already bad. The current one would necessarily be worse. People's lives have already been negatively affected. The infrastructure has already been destroyed. Unfortunately, as things are right now, as much as I don't like TikTok, and I don't like the access that China has to using it to spy on people because they have been known to engage in their own violations, their own human rights violations in Hong Kong and with the Uyghur genocide. As much as I have those issues, I do understand the idea that TikTok, as a platform, is a way for people who are currently under fire in Gaza, in the West Bank, to get their stories out there. It will take a lot of time to rebuild, and unfortunately, do you know who one of the few Palestinian allies are on paper? Like, from a diplomatic state is? It's Iran. Like, one of the few allies they have is Iran. That also engage in a fuck ton of human rights violations. You either get the regime that has you as an apartheid state, where you're fucked, or you have the theocratic regime, where it's also fucked. Take your pick. The situation is not good, and I wish that we actually did more to support Palestine as the United States. But again, because we are a trade partner with Israel, it's only ever going to be very surface level relief. Blinken replied that Americans, 2/3 of whom want the Biden administration to push for a permanent ceasefire, and 57 of whom disapprove of Joe Biden's approach to the war, are on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative, said the Secretary of State. We can't discount that, but I think it's also a very, very challenging effect on the narrative. Romney suggests that banning TikTok would quiet the growing outrage over Israeli atrocities in the United States. Some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at all the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly among TikTok broadcasts. And then he's actually got...
Why has the PR been so awful? I know that's not your area of expertise, but you have to have some thoughts on that, which is, I mean, as you've said, why has Hamas disappeared in terms of public perception? An offer is on the table to have a ceasefire, and yet the world is screaming about Israel. It's like, why aren't they screaming about Hamas? Accept the ceasefire, bring home the hostages. It said it's...
So let's pretend for a minute that the ceasefire happens and all the hostages are brought home. Let's just go ahead and pretend that happens right now. Like, instantaneously, that occurs. What happens then? Every single child whose parents were killed by Israel, of which the body count is 35,000, every single child there grows up in a world where an Israeli bomb blew up their house. What happens when that generation grows up? What happens when that generation is old enough to pick up a rifle? That violence will continue. Because those children will grow up in a world where the only thing that they knew for years was bombardment. Lucian says, I don't know how many times I have to say it, but ignoring a problem will not make it go away. Yeah. And a ceasefire isn't enough. You need an actual guaranteed truce between both sides, supported by both sides, and then you need infrastructure support to Palestine and the West Bank. You need infrastructure that is supported not just by Israel, but by the world as a whole, to rebuild their entire country from the ground up, because that's what's left, and try to curb violence in that region going forward from the generation that's coming next. Said the Israeli government is the biggest recruiter and financer for Hamas. Netanyahu did bankroll part of Hamas, if memory serves, or at least supported their founding. Said it may be the UN acting as watchdog to ensure neither steps over the line. If I thought the UN was useful, sure. It's amazing how useful the UN is when Ukraine is getting attacked by Russia. It's amazing how useful the UN is while Israel is wiping Palestine off the planet. It's amazing how useful the UN is while the United States takes on territories and turns them into not states that don't have the ability to vote for themselves in our own democracy. It's amazing how useful the UN is at doing fucking nothing. Remember, the United States owns more territories than just the 50 states themselves, and those territories don't really get a lot of say in jack shit. In theory, the UN would act as a deterrent from further atrocities happening on either side and rebuilding things for the Palestinians who have had so much of their infrastructure wiped off the map. But you and I both know that that scenario is a pipe dream at the moment. Says the United Nations has been bombed like 3 times. And yeah, their embassy in Lebanon was actually hit as well, wasn't it? Remember, in one way or another, the United States has been involved in some type of constant war. Said no, the embassy. Yeah, the embassy. Like, in one way or the other, the United States has been involved in constant war somehow, some way. For, like, the last 100 years? And for a good chunk of that, the United Nations has existed. Said not the embassy? Not the... Okay. Not know the embassy, not to the embassy. Okay, then I am misremembering something there, Oz. UN bases and convoys in the south of the country? Oh, damn.
It's all the other way around. I mean, typically the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there? And
we're on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. And you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images dominates. And we can't discount that. But I think it also has a very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok.
Jesus. And that's kind of where we're at. Also, Fushi, thank you so much for the raid. How was your stream? Unfortunately, we're knee-deep in the middle of politics at the moment. So, I apologize for your audience being stuck here now. Jeez, but that's largely a very, very concerning statement from Romney. That is a very, very concerning statement. Going, hey, people are in support of this thing. We don't like that, so we're going to ban this because people are in support of the thing on it. That's kind of fucking awful. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, insert in the video tagline. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Nixie-chan, the Oberon team, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.